Hey everybody, Garry Adelman, American Battlefield Trust. We got Kris White behind the camera. Here's another video in the Appomattox campaign. I'm here with our good friend Patrick Schroeder, longtime friend of the Trust. He is the historian of APPS. What is APPS?
APPS is the Appomattox Petersburg Preservation Society, the only group specifically dedicated to preserving battlefields in the Appomattox campaign.
Good, good. And we've worked together on this very site here.
Yes, indeed.
Before we get there, though, real quick, just know that we hope you've been following our coverage. We've been to City Point, we've been to Five Forks and the Breakthrough. We've been to Sailors Creek and High Bridge. And where are we now, and how did the troops get here?
We are at the Appomattox Station battlefield, and the troops that occupied this area were under General Reuben Lindsay Walker. He had the reserve artillery of Lee's army. When Lee's army started this campaign, he had 250 cannon with him. That's a lot of guns.
It is.
And artillery has a habit of slowing down the march of the army. So at Amelia Courthouse on April 4th, they culled out the least effective pieces, 100 guns, put them under Walker, and he was supposed to go on a northern route over to Lynchburg and deposit those 100 guns there.
I'm sure Walker loved this. Like, you're going to get the least effective guns.
Yeah.
Let's walk over here while we talk here.
Sure.
Let's Walker
Sure.
As we go. And so they're put under him. 100 guns are around here. What else is going on?
Yep, so what he does is he comes down the road that you or any visitor would drive in on, and he goes into camp here with those guns on April 8th. He is just ahead of the Army of Northern Virginia. And it's a nice day for a change. It's not raining, it's not snowing, and they get some rations from down at the station, and they turn their mules loose out here. Get here about 2 o'clock. They're only gonna stay here for a few hours, but there are supply trains down at Appomattox Station. The Federals had used, some might consider devious means. Some people call them Jesse Scouts. We call them Major Henry Young Scouts in this campaign. They found out that the trains were at Appomattox Station, a sergeant named James White. He goes back and tells Sheridan the supply trains are at Appomattox Station. Sheridan turns to his right-hand man, George Armstrong Custer, and tells Custer to go get those trains.
Okay, so it's weird, you know, at this point here, you said that Walker's guys were able to get some food actually at the station, so this is active operations. And the Confederates had a chance to get to this station first.
Yeah, well, at least Walker's command.
Yeah.
He's ahead of Lee's main army, which their advance only reaches Appomattox Courthouse, you know, about 2-3 miles away. So they don't ever get down to the station, but some of the supplies do make it from the station to Lee's army. But Reuben Lindsay Walker, he is under the impression everything is just fine and dandy here because Fitzhugh Lee, who commands the Confederate cavalry, had sent him a note saying the Federal cavalry was at Prospect Station. Well, that's 20 miles away. So 20 miles away, they're not even going to be here till the next day, so Walker's got plenty of time. But at 4 o'clock, they aren't 20 miles away, they're right over here approaching Appomattox Station.
Okay, good, good. Now, a couple of things. First of all, for those of you wanting to learn more about Young Scouts, Jesse Scouts, there's a new book. Just came out, last year from Patrick O'Donnell, The Unvanquished. Excellent book. I recommend it so that people can learn about it. Two, I'm going to walk over to Kris White behind the camera here because, Kris, somebody once referred to Lindsay Walker based on his looks. What did they say?
He is the most handsome man in the Confederacy.
There you go. And then thirdly, so here's Walker. The U.S. cavalry is starting to, get their bead on where Walker is.
Yep.
Let's set up as to what's happening here. You told me that Walker's in this vicinity. Lay out how he is.
Well, I'll tell you what he's doing. He's actually getting a shave by one of his men. He has the best mustache and goatee in the Confederate Army. And a rider comes in from Appomattox Station saying, the Yankees are coming, Sheridan. So this is his first news that there are Federals even anywhere close.
Okay.
What's he gonna do? He's got 100 artillery pieces, no infantry support. Well, he's gonna try to get as many guns away as he can. And he basically dispatches about 70 guns from this area, but he gets about 30 guns drawn up into a semicircle in this vicinity where we're standing.
So in other words, just real quick, like off to the camera's left is where this artillery line is, sort of?
Yes.
Okay.
And he's going to start dropping shells down towards Appomattox Station. Well, cavalrymen get a little curious where shells are coming from, and they start probing through the woods. This area is terrible ground for fighting a Civil War battle. Thick woods. They said it was blackjack pine and scrub oak. Yeah. And the cavalrymen, as they charge into the woods, are getting their faces scratched, their hats knocked off, so they go into these trails, and the trails lead through the woods, and then they lead out here in front of Walker's Guns where they get peppered with canister shot.
Oh, man.
So, you know, you don't have to kill a cavalryman to take him out of action. That canister hits a horse just as well as it does a man.
Right. What I'm seeing here too is, first of all, if I'm Walker, I'm not liking these odds. If this map is showing what it's like, it looks like they're outnumbered. They've got horsemen that can approach them quickly. And as far as I know, Custer's and other men do charge with this, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. What Custer does is every time a brigade arrives, he launches an attack.
Sounds like Custer.
Yeah. He starts off with Pennington's brigade. You can see that right here. They're going to charge first. They're going to get repulsed. That's at 5 o'clock. At 6 o'clock, it is Henry Capart's brigade of West Virginians and New Yorkers. They're going to come in on the left, federal left flank, Walker's right. They're going to be repulsed. They say the 1st West Virginia Cavalry lost half their horses in these charges.
Wow.
And Custer was up there himself leading it, and he said, boys, we got to find another way.
Wow, and as far as I remember, this stuff is in daylight, but it's starting to get dark by the time the other guys arrive.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, these guys, Wells's brigade with the 1st Vermont, 15th, and 8th New York, they show up about 7 o'clock and launch their assault on the right flank, but the sun had set at 6:18. So it is getting pretty dark out here. So a lot of this fighting is going to take place after dark. Walker's successful in pushing back each one of Custer's probes from those 3 brigades. But at about 8 o'clock, he gets all of his guys together and makes a final assault. And you can see out here, these are skirmishers. There were artillerymen that had picked up rifles along the retreat acting as skirmishers, but Custer overruns them and Walker's main guns. And this area that the American Battlefield Trust and preserved is the core battlefield area. And Elmer Montague of the 1st Vermont said when they got into the guns, they said everyone was fighting for themselves and fighting like tigers.
Wow.
Hand-to-hand combat. Allison Randall of the 2nd New York said he saw as they came out of the woods, there was a flash of 6 bright lights and a storm of canister passed over top of them. And he said, then they were in the guns.
Wow.
And end up capturing 25 artillery pieces.
I guess if you can manage to survive short-range canister, the good thing is that you can get to the guns somewhat quickly. Now, here's your chance. You know, we don't come out here a lot. We encourage everybody to come out to the site. We'll talk about the site in a second, but here's your chance, Patrick. I know you like this place. You're really invested in this place. What's another story you'd like to tell about anybody or anything that happened here at Appomattox Station?
Yeah, there was an adjutant of the 1st Vermont Cavalry, Erie Woodbury. He had gone to Dartmouth College, and he is charging, well, they're over on the federal right flank with the 1st Vermont. They're coming in from this direction, and his horse and himself get hit with canister. He says he does a double somersault off of his horse and hits the ground. When he recovers himself, he says he looks at his hand, and canister had gone across the back of his hand, and his fingers had flopped over on his hand. So, and he was the adjutant, so that was the hand he did all his writing
Maybe
with.
he learned to write with the other hand.
I think he probably at least tried. So
it leaves me wondering whether, as he got older, if he said he did that double somersault and landed on his feet and continued with the fight. I mean, you know how we do this.
Yeah, sometimes, but only accounts I've seen, he talks about lying on the ground.
Well, let's wrap up this part of the fight before we go over to Appomattox proper, Appomattox Courthouse, because there's more fighting to go. But look, what's sort of the result of this fight? What really ends up happening?
So when Custer's men capture these 25 guns that are left here, they get through and they capture the Confederate wagon trains, which are out on the stage road, which includes hospital trains. They capture General Young Moody. And then Custer, the 15th New York under Lieutenant Colonel Root actually makes a charge all the way into the village of Appomattox Courthouse. So this battle extends all the way from here into Appomattox Courthouse, and Root runs into the main Army of Northern Virginia, which infantry appears and fires several volleys and dispatches several men under Root, and they fall back out of the village and hunker down west of the village. Root himself is killed with a bullet that passes through his neck. And so Custer's men hunker down on the ridge west of Appomattox, but Custer's aggressiveness somewhere between 180,000 and 300,000 rations, new uniforms, ammunition, equipment, everything the Army of Northern Virginia needs to continue on. They've captured 25 guns and about 1,000 prisoners, but most importantly, they had secured the Richmond-Lynchburg Stage Road, which was Lee's line of retreat.
Good, and we're gonna pick up this video after we talk about this park a little. We're gonna pick up this video a little bit along that very road, that important road, because that will impact other things that are happening in Appomattox, of course. Very important road. Now, before we go over there real quick, Patrick, how did this preservation, in a few words, happen? I know that APPS worked with the Trust to save it. I know we have brand new signage here.
Yes, we do.
Just put in weeks ago, as far as I know.
That's right.
Thank you to our own Dan Davis for working with Civil War Trails and APPS to get this put in. How did this happen? Did you just notice it for sale?
So what happened was the Jamerson Trucking Company that was here, they were retiring and closing down, and there was a public meeting on what would be done with the property. And they had ideas of creating an outlet mall here or a campground. And I was at that meeting. I suggested that there was a group that might be interested in helping preserve it as a Civil War battlefield. And that was, at the time, the Civil War Preservation Trust. And of course they said, well, who's going to pay for it? And I said, well, there's thousands of people in that group from all over the country that would probably contribute to help preserve this battlefield.
Excellent.
And there was a great matching grant at the time, and they raised the money very quickly to purchase 46 acres here. And this past October, it was turned over from the American Battlefield Trust to the Appomattox Petersburg Preservation Society to look after it until it can be incorporated into the National Park Service, but we just don't know when that'll be.
Thanks, Patrick. We're right off the edge of the park. Our next video will be only a couple of miles away, and y'all, the members of this organization, this is the type of thing we do. This could have been an outlet mall, but you helped us step in, preserve the site, and it's one of more than 160 that you have helped us save around the country of the Civil War, the Revolution. So thank you, Patrick. We'll be with you. You might be wearing different clothes. You want to say something else?
I would say the Appomattox Petersburg Preservation Society are going to present campfire programs the night of April 8th on the 160th anniversary.
All right, good.
Yeah.
Patrick might be dressed differently, but we'll see you closer to Appomattox Courthouse a couple miles away. All right, we've moved just a couple of miles. Now we are in the Appomattox National Historic Park. What part of the park is this? What's going on here?
Well, we are out on the battlefield of April 9th, 1865, and behind us is the village of Appomattox Courthouse, and you can even see the McLean House in the distance where Lee and Grant met to have the surrender meeting. That village was formed, given the name Appomattox Courthouse in 1845. Prior to that, it was called Clover Hill. And there were about 120 people as of the census of 1860 that lived here. This was a county seat, but the county was pretty small, 9,000 people. That was enslaved and free people here. And but this would become the center of focus after the battle here on the morning of April 9th.
Good. Well, before we get into the battle real quick, I see a cemetery there. I know we're standing on a famous road here. I know the railroad's coming to town, so what's going on around here?
Yeah, so we're standing on the Richmond-Lynchburg Stage Road here, and this is Lee's line of retreat. The cavalry that we were speaking about down at Appomattox Station set up on the ridge just west of here. The Union casualties, the men that were killed and buried on the battlefield, were dug up and taken to Poplar Grove Cemetery at Petersburg and interred in the National Cemetery there. There was no National Cemetery for the Confederates. The Ladies Memorial Association here in Appomattox said they wanted to establish a regular burial ground for the Confederate soldiers that were left out here. And over here is where they are buried. 18 Confederates buried there, 1 Union soldier. They said they needed room for 40 Confederates, but they wrote people and got in touch with loved ones to come back and recover the bodies.
When we last picked up, we know that Reuben Lindsay Walker was going to take the guns ahead. He sent some of the guns off. A lot of them were captured. But then they realized that they have bigger problems on their hand, and that's going to help lead to this fight. Could you set that up?
Yeah. So after the Battle of Appomattox Station on April 8th, General Lee has a Council of War at his headquarters, which is about a mile off in this direction, maybe a little more than a mile from where we're standing here. And he consults with General Longstreet, General Gordon, his two commanders, along with Fitzhugh Lee, who commands the cavalry. And he's already been corresponding with Grant, should he go ahead and surrender to the Army. And apparently it was unanimous. They thought that they could fight their way out here, that only Federal cavalry could have got that far ahead of them. And so he orders General Gordon's corps, along with Fitzlee's cavalry and Armistead Long's artillery, to make an assault the morning of April 9th.
Now, before we get into that assault, because it's not going to take long to describe,
Sure.
I think, if you've got Gordon's guys over here and Lee generally around here, there are other pinchers closing around Robert E. Lee. It's
well,
not
that's
just the
true.
cavalry in his front
Right.
and the infantry.
So what happened after, on April 7th, Grant had troops in Farmville on the south side of the Appomattox River. Lee has been forced to the north side of the Appomattox River. The next place he can get supplies is at Appomattox Station. So he's heading for Appomattox Station, but Grant has the Army of the James, which has the 24th Corps and 2 brigades of the 25th Corps United States Colored Troops, and the 5th Corps, as well as the cavalry, on that southern pincer.
Man, and he's not going to get those supplies.
Lee is not going to get to him first, that's for sure. And on the northern pincer, that is where the main Army of the Potomac is, with Meade and the 2nd Corps under Humphreys and the 6th Corps under Wright. So they're on the northern pincer on the north side of the Appomattox River, and it's going to come together all within about 5 miles here at Appomattox Courthouse.
And after a lot of the summer and then all of fall, all of winter, and part of the spring, you've got, you know, Union Confederate soldiers in the trenches of Petersburg. When, as we've talked about, the final offensive pushes Robert E. Lee out of there, you know, you've got the Confederates in a miserable condition. The Union is much better supplied at that point. The Confederates are short on horse flesh in every way, and you had Edward Otho Cresap Ord actually saying that this will be decided, you know, by your legs. This is a game of marching. Your legs lead us to victory.
That's right.
Could you talk a little bit before the fight about the condition of the Confederate Army at this point?
Well, yeah, what Grant has done rather masterfully is deprive the Confederates of receiving additional rations on the way to, well, Lee never even intended to come here. He's going to Amelia Courthouse. He thinks he's going to get rations at Amelia Courthouse. There's no rations there, mainly because there was a mess up with the Confederate command structure, Robert E. Lee. And so he can't get rations at Amelia. He goes towards Farmville because Lee wants to go south to North Carolina. Now he's heading west. He's going to get trains at Farmville, 120,000 rations there. Well, Grant's troops are pressing so hard, they get very few of those rations issued. They have to close up the trains, move them to Prospect Station. They get captured the next day. So Grant keeps depriving Lee's army of getting food. So, you know, if you're not getting fed, you're not going to want to fight too much.
Not
you
to
know, it's
mention,
hard
I mean,
to keep going.
Your wagons are breaking down. You don't have horse flesh anymore.
Yeah.
You're not eating. And you see, Lincoln's won the election already. You're giving up your capital city. The Confederates have to. And then after the Battle of Sailor's Creek, where they lost a quarter of their army and 8 of their generals, they just can't be in a good spirit.
No. And 15,000 of them or so see the writing on the wall and go home.
Just go home.
Yeah, they just leave the army.
So those people who are here on the morning of April 9th, they're kind of the diehards. Either they have no other option or they're still really in believing in the possibility of winning.
Yeah, well, I'd say that Gordon's Corps has been acting as the rear guard of Lee's army and done most of the fighting throughout the campaign. Longstreet's Corps has done very little fighting and is in pretty good shape. In fact, General Field's division has somewhere between 4,000 and 5,000 men. Gordon's whole corps doesn't have 5,000 men.
That's a big April 65 division.
So yeah, yeah. So it all depended where you were and how much fighting you saw.
Okay.
But Lee's army is not in good condition. It is fragmenting by the day, and many of them see the writing on the wall.
Okay,
certainly
so
on April 9th.
So what do they actually intend? What do they try to do, and what happens right here?
So unfortunately for Gordon, he is now at the front, and he has to bring his troops from the Appomattox River Valley through the village and form in the fields towards the wood line to the south, with Fitzhugh Lee's cavalry on his right and that artillery support. The Federals replaced Custer's men with Smith's brigade off to the west and have 2 pieces of artillery under Lieutenant James Lord. And the skirmishing starts as soon as the sun comes up. And Lord's gun starts dropping shells into the Confederate lines. It's about 7:45 that morning. The Confederates are actually ready to advance. They do a left wheel. They come up across these fields here into the woods in our sight in the distance and come in on the left flank of Smith's brigade. And they end up driving Smith. The Confederates heavily outnumbered the Union brigade up there and drive Smith off the ridge.
And I guess then the Confederates win, they break out, they hook up with Joe Johnston, right?
No.
Okay.
They were hoping for that. What they do is they push south of the Richmond-Lynchburg stage road that we're standing on.
Okay.
This is they're gonna protect this line of retreat. So now the Army wagons, Mahone, Longstreet, they can retreat along this direction without being attacked in flank. Well, the thing is, they don't know that General E.O.C. Ord, along with John Gibbon of the 24th Corps and those U.S. colored troops, had done an incredible feat of marching on April 8th and covered anywhere between 25, 30 or plus miles in about 24 hours.
And when you are well fed and when you see the end in sight, you can do a little bit more.
Yeah, and they did. They arrived on the field and began to push the Confederate infantry back.
Okay, and then the inevitable is going to happen. We're not going to cover that in this video, but is there anything else to tie up this video? As Gordon falls back, they must have been absolutely deflated.
Yeah, certainly they are not happy with this prospect. I mean, Gordon at some point sent a note to General Lee saying, "I fought my corps to a frazzle, and I cannot go forward unless I'm supported by Longstreet or these troops are prevented from coming upon my rear." Well, what troops is he talking about coming upon his rear? Off to the south, the 5th Corps is now on the scene under General Griffin.
You know,
So
as these days go on, it's sort of like the enemy cavalry outnumbers most of your whole force, and then they have infantry that doubles or triples your force as well.
Yeah.
Lee is not easy to bring to bay. To make this guy surrender is not easy, but it's finally happening.
it is.
Well, then one more thing before we go. First of all, I think most people who study the Civil War, they learn eventually that something happens sort of at Cold Harbor, and then they hear about the crater, and then somehow the capital falls, and then there's Appomattox.
Right.
But obviously we're learning there's a lot more in between.
Sure.
I don't think most people know about the fight at Appomattox Station. They certainly don't know that there's fighting here right next to the courthouse
That's
on the
right.
morning of the night, the day of the
Yeah,
surrender.
I mean, 800 guys are killed and wounded here on April 8th and April 9th. I mean, it's terrible to be killed or wounded anytime, but considering the surrender takes place on the 9th, the same day for many of them, just awful.
How especially tragic. You were just pointing out a soldier who enlisted right at the beginning of the war only to fight here.
Right, Jesse Hutchins of the 5th Alabama Battalion, he enlisted on April 15th, 1861. And when I went through his records, man, he was in service the whole time. He wasn't AWOL, wasn't gone on furlough a lot. He was there for everything. And he gets killed in front of the courthouse on April 8th when the 15th New York Cavalry charges into town. So
Yeah, I think his friend left behind a reminiscence, as I remember, actually, about that, where he was
Yes.
sleeping. His friend, they woke up in the middle of the night from this skirmish or something like that. It's all coming together now.
Yes.
And I think that really underscores, the nature of this sad event, but also the import of the battlefields. This is not just a surrender site. This is a battlefield. This is
Right.
a cemetery. And for many people, this was their end, their last site.
Oh yeah, James Wilson of the 14th Virginia Cavalry, their color bearer, he gets cut down in this fight on the morning of April 9th. And after the fighting ends, his friend, last name Moffett, goes out and finds him in a hospital. And they know that Lee and Grant are meeting or have met over at the McLean house. And Wilson has been wounded so severely, he knows he's going to die. And he says to Moffett, "It's hard to die now that the war's over."
Wow.
Can you imagine being in that position where you know that the surrender has taken place, but you've been wounded so bad you're not going to live to go home?
Oh my God.
So, and that was Wilson's situation, and he died the next day.
Thank you for that, Patrick. What
Sure.
I would say, y'all, we're going to leave it there. But We've appreciated you sticking with us on our coverage as we've gone from City Point to several videos to here. I appreciate you, Patrick. Thanks to Kris White behind the camera. Thanks for everything you do. Make sure you share this video with your friends and click that subscribe button on YouTube so we can bring more of this history to as many people as possible. I really appreciate everything, and thanks for all your support of battlefield preservation and education.
Hello, this is Trace Atkins. To stay up to date on all the latest and coolest videos, please subscribe to the Trust YouTube channel. Preserve, educate, inspire.